Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Candy and today I'm going to be talking about how to deal with change. So I was reading about this hurricane that hit Galveston in September 8th, the year 1900. The winds were, I was reading that they were 140 miles per hour. The tidal surges were 16 feet high. And it was reported that over 6,000 people lost their lives and about 3,600 plus homes and buildings were destroyed. And so I happen to live by the coast and the Gulf Coast. And so we are always hearing about hurricanes. And so we have evacuation procedures and so forth. And so the residents in Galveston were clearly not prepared, right? Afterwards to see all that happened. And so I read that after the storm, after the hurricane had passed, that they were recovering, that they made some radical changes. They built a 17-foot high seawall and it was 3 miles long, and they raised the elevation of the entire city by several feet. And so we can learn from that, because a few years later when a storm hit that was similar to that one, there was minimal damage because they were prepared, right? They had prepared. And so I say this to say that when the storms of life hit us, and they will, then we must choose how we're going to respond. A lot of times our relationships are torn apart simply because we're not prepared to deal with them, the storms, the stresses of them. And so we can't stop the hurricane winds of change to come into our lives, right? Change is going to come in our lives. It's inevitable. It's part of life. And so we can't stop them from coming into our marriages, into our families, into our relationships. But we can definitely prepare for them and learn from the past ones. So I'm going to read Ecclesiastes 3:1. It says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." And change is a part of life. And it will either make you stronger or knock you down. When in a marriage, it'll either draw you closer together or it's going to destroy your relationship. With your bodies, if you get an illness or an injury, it's either going to destroy your spirit or it's going to make you stronger than ever. A career, you lose the opportunity, your dream is smothered, or you can get discouraged, or it'll cause you to fan the flames even more and say, you know what, I'm going to try even harder. I'm not going to let this hold me back or keep me back. And so it all depends on your response. There are some things that are going to help us during the winds of change that come into our lives. And one of those things is going to be when we put biblical principles into practice. So we're going to go to the book of Acts 27. It says, this is Paul, and he was a prisoner on a ship that was headed to Rome. And so he describes that particular journey. He says, before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the Northeaster swept down from the island, and the ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. Now, the crew there had actually tried to fight the strong winds, but they realized it was pointless. What they did, they stopped and they began to go with it, ride with it, because you're not going to be able to stop a storm in progress. There's no way. And so it's the same thing in our lives. Change is inevitable, and you can waste your time and energy trying to change that or trying to fight the change that's coming in your life, but it's not going to work, because that change is inevitable. Change is a part of our lives. Our changes are. So what does that look like? When you're trying to fight against it, it's when you want to cling on to the past, and you even romanticize how things used to be. You get stubborn and you think back on the good old days and you want to stay there. You keep looking to the past of how things used to be. But if you don't learn to adapt to change, you're never going to enjoy life. You're going to be stuck. Even though that change is scary, it's uncertain, it's threatening, it can also be healthy, it can be powerful, it can be refreshing and necessary. Life is like a voyage, and our ship is gonna encounter storms at times. And so when we remain in denial, or when we're trying to control or cling to the past, we're never gonna be fulfilled. And so you don't experience a real life trying to go around those winds of change, but instead it's when you go through them. Sometimes we're waiting for obstacles or situations to change, to be gone, right? And then we say, well, now I can live my life. But not realizing that the obstacles and the changes, that is our life. That's the life that we're living right now, and that's what we're dealing with. And so learning and growing through life storms, they're going to require a couple of things. One of them is you're going to steer against the storm, or you're going to learn to ride it and steer with it. Sea captains, they know this, that if they try to steer against a storm, it's just going to crush the ship. It's going to be split in half. And Paul, I'm going to read in Acts 27:20, he was not a stranger to storms. So let me read that. Acts 27:20. It says, because he was out there, they were out there for 14 days, and they were surrounded by rain, and that there was no land in sight. And so it says, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. They began to lose hope because they couldn't see through the storm. And so maybe you can relate to that. Maybe there's a storm raging in your life right now. Maybe it's been going on for days or weeks or years. And I just want to encourage you, don't give up. Just keep going. Winston Churchill is known to have said, if you're going through hell, keep going. You keep going. You'll come out of that. And so Paul was the only one that was actually calm in the storm. And because the reason was that he was able to see past the storm. He chose to look beyond the winds and everything that storm was bringing, and look past it to what was coming up ahead, a positive change. It's easy to look at the immediate problems that we have or that we're dealing with and become negative, become depressed, desperate for an escape from whatever struggle or pain that it brings us. But I need you to know that God doesn't cause the painful changes in our lives, but he will use them to bring something good out of them. And so one way that he does this is by growing our character. And so another thing that change brings about is clarity. During our daily routines, it's real easy to lose sight of what matters the most. But change can clarify our priorities and can actually illuminate what's really important. I'm going to read Acts again, 27:18, because look what started to happen. It says, we took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. So what happened was that cargo that was on that ship, that I'm sure was packed carefully, maybe some of the boxes even said fragile, they had once been important. Well, at that moment and in that time, they meant nothing compared to losing their lives. And so the crew started throwing off the cargo that overboard so that the ship wouldn't sink. And so what was considered valuable a few days before was now worthless. And so whenever the storms of life come into our lives, it's going to force us to reevaluate our priorities. And one of those important priorities will be your relationships. Now, while we have to learn to adapt to change and ride the storm, we also need to know when to stop and anchor, drop the anchor, and just stay put in one place. And I'm going to read Acts 27:29. It says, fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. Because we're going to need an anchor that we can trust, that we can rely on, and that anchor is Jesus. And he doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. While everything around us is changing, we can trust that God will not change. And so when those winds from hurricanes blow into our lives, we can rest assured that God knows exactly where we're at. You're not alone. And whether you feel his presence or not, he's right there with you. And God will see you through the storms just like he's seen me through them. And so, because God has plans for our lives. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says, I know the plans for you. They're good plans to prosper you, not to hurt you. So let me ask you a question. Are you looking back, wishing for the good old days? Is nostalgia causing you to miss out on present opportunities? I'm guilty of that. Soon after my husband passed away, I kind of just wanted to stay there. Even though I was physically present in life, it was like I was in a spiritual coma. I didn't have any desire to engage or participate in life. I was just going through the motions. But God dealt with me and said, you know what? Your husband's gone. He's with me, but you're still here on earth, and I still have plans for you. And so I was ashamed. I repented. I said, you know what? I'm sorry. You have plans for my life, and I want to fulfill those, whatever you have in store for me. And so it's important that you trust God when it comes to your life, because he loves you and he's got you. He's going to pull you through whatever changes, through whatever transitions that you're going to be going through or that you're going through right now. And so I hope this video helps. If you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do that. Share the video with someone that you feel will be encouraged by it. Make sure you like it. And as always, do something good for you. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.